Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. I want to thank Sil Zalkin and her amazing team at ACNJ for this partnership. I must share again my appreciation to the 500 childcare leaders and directors who courageously opened their centers on April 1st to children of frontline staff and essential workers. In the development of these webinars, we lean to you for examples of practice. This is all very new, and we recognize that the rules are evolving and changing as we transition to a new normal. I want to do a very quick recap from last week's webinar. I mentioned that I'm in contact with providers every day, and in speaking with them, I realized how challenging this transition is for many of you. It's overwhelming, it's hard. For some, it might be scary. You might be anxious, and I want to acknowledge those feelings because they are real, and that's okay. Remember that the governor said that centers can reopen on June 15th. He didn't say they must reopen. Last week, we outlined the first 3 strategies for reopening. 1, contact your parents and have conversations about reopening. Survey them to see which children by age will be returning and when. You then would have a sense of how many children need care by age when they plan to return. 2, have a conversation with your staff. Check in with them to see how they're feeling. Do they feel comfortable returning to work? And if so, what supports can you provide to assist them in being successful? You now know how many children by age are returning and when. You know how many staff you need, and you now have a sense of how many staff are available to work. Do you have enough staff to care for the children and address the new requirements? If not, you might need to hire staff. And then finally, we talked about costs for operating with an emphasis on new costs associated with the new regulations, and also financial resources. But no matter when you open, there are things you have to consider. And the purpose of today's session is to help you think about the reopening strategies and help you move through the process. I want to add that you are not alone. You have state officials and departments that are here to support you. Your OOL inspector will be a great resource for you. You have your local child care resource and referral agency, and you have your colleagues. Your local CCR&Rs will be reaching out to you to help you along the way. Remember that we are all in this together. I realize that centers have often competed against each other, but now it's a time for collaboration and sharing. And lastly, the goal is for centers to reopen. Families and children need your services, and the economy cannot flourish without you. Today, we are going to cover daily operations. PowerPoint, please. It's my hope that we can leave you with real-life examples on how to implement the policies that are now required. So our first task for today is to develop a check-in or screening and assessment process. It might look very different in each center. Some centers, based on the design of their building, will have options that others will not have. If you have a driveway in front of your entrance, you may be able to screen children before they get out of the car, while others will have to walk up to the building to be screened. Next slide, please. This is going to be our agenda today: screening and admittance, sanitizing and hygiene, staff, physical distancing, play, and classrooms. And then, as Sil mentioned, we'll have a short Q&A time. Next screen. Now, what I've taken the liberty of doing is actually cutting and pasting the new regs, the summary of the new regs, into the PowerPoint. I'm hoping that you have them in front of you. If you don't, these are the regs that we're going to be focusing on today as it relates to screening and admittance. So let's go to our video. We have a video clip that we're going to share with you that shows you how one particular center is doing screening and admittance.
feeling? Any cough, any fever?
Everyone's feeling fine.
Everyone's fine at home?
Yes.
And the temperature today?
98.4.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Wash your hands, please.
Okay. So this is the screening and admittance procedures for one particular center. Nicole, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about this process that you established in your program, and you know, what did it take?
Basically, when children come in the morning, we have the parents, as you could see, pre-tell us. We make sure that the parents are taking the temperatures before even leaving the house. So then that way, if they have a fever, they're not going to be coming to the center at that point. Once they get to the center, then we're opening the door, asking the same questions, getting the answers, taking the temperature. Immediately, we do have a sink right there, so we're able to have the children wash their hands immediately. Then at that point, we do all of our processes by writing it down, because we do have every morning a report. So we're writing all that information down, and then they're going into their individual classrooms at that point.
Okay, thank you. Keisha, can you tell us a little bit about your procedure for admittance?
Yes, our procedure is pretty similar. We allow one family in our lobby at a time. At that time, when the children arrive, the parents have to answer the questions on the questionnaire. We do take the children's temperature. After the parents sign off on the questionnaire, they then leave. We take the children to the hand washing sink, and we then take them to their class.
Okay. Now, Brian, you had a chance to look at the short video. Would you like to share any information or things that you've heard or challenges that you may have heard from directors on how to proceed with this process?
Well, first, it really looked like, Nicole, you really did that exactly the way we would hope. That looked great. We definitely recommend, I saw you were using the touchless thermometer. That's definitely, if it's available, and we know a lot of folks are having some difficulty obtaining thermometers right now, but if it's available, that's definitely the preference, because there's no need to worry about cross-contamination and touching faces with the thermometer. The child was wearing a mask. We're always great to see that. The social distancing was maintained. I know we see some questions in the chat here talking about the need for physical barriers. Physical barriers are one of the options, but what you were implying there was the social distancing, which is an equally permissible option and something we would definitely encourage where it's possible.
Okay. One question that's in our chat box also is about the portable sink. Can you tell us a little bit about that and if it's allowed to be used for this purpose?
Yes, it is. No, it needs to be maintained in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, but portable sinks are not prohibited. They're permissible, and in this case, it would be appropriate.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. We're going to go back to the PowerPoint. So our next area of concern is sanitation and hygiene. Next screen. Okay, so this is, these are the regulations as it relates to sanitizing and hygiene, which of course requires enhanced cleaning, reinforced hand washing practices to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So let's go to our clip in the video and see what happens. Okay, so as we can see, there's a lot of cleaning going on. I noticed that some of the high touch points are cleaned quite frequently. Nicole, please tell us about the sanitation and hygiene procedures that you have in place.
Basically, as you saw, we do have a checklist for everything we do, and we are doing it hourly. Sometimes we're doing it every 15 minutes during drop off and pick up those certain areas just because there's more hands. We're definitely doing it 3 times the amount of times we used to. The vacuuming has become major, as well as, you know, mopping the floors more frequently, getting all of those different supplies, making sure that we have plenty during this time period. So basically, it's just upping what we've already been doing as childcare providers. It's just doing it more throughout the day. Definitely every hour. The biggest thing is you don't realize how many times you're touching a doorknob. So being aware of those things is key and critical to keep your center clean, as well as keeping everybody healthy and safe during this time period.
Okay. And can you tell us, I don't think the regs actually specifically say how many times a day you have to clean. It does say you have to clean regularly. And how did you come up with the schedule for cleaning?
We came up with a schedule where staff, depending on how they're coming in, take the turns to do it. I mean, obviously, my center is, I have an infant toddler side, and then we have preschool and school age. So the infant and toddlers obviously are doing their side, but the staff are held accountable. And we had a meeting when this all started, and the biggest thing was making sure that the center, not just for the children, but for the staff themselves, stays absolutely clean, because again, you don't realize how many things you are touching throughout the day. So we at least knew that those surfaces that are touching, and no, nobody really said, but between talking with Office of Licensing, our local health department, as well as Norwest Cap, they were making the suggestion at least, you know, close to every hour.
Keisha, can you share with us a little information about how you're keeping your center sanitized and some of the hygiene procedures you're using?
Yes, sure. So we are also spraying down our doorknobs, our light switches, our chairs after lunchtime when the kids are done. Teachers have Lysol or the Lysol equivalent in their classrooms to make sure that they're staying on top of sanitizing. We're not doing it hourly, more so like every 2 hours, a nice deep cleaning at nap time when all the kids are down. And then again in the afternoon, and then another nice deep cleaning at the end of the day before we go home. We're also sanitizing toys after the kids are done playing with them. We're sanitizing them in the sink and letting them dry out before they are allowed to play with them again. Constant hand washing, nonstop hand washing for the children as well as the teachers. It has increased more than it was pre-pandemic. So we're doing a lot more hand washing as well too. So everybody's just pretty much trying to stay vigilant, making sure the building stays as clean as possible. You know, while we're using it.
Was that a difficult transition for your staff?
No, I don't think it was. I think we were already used to sanitizing and everything. That was our normal routine. We just are doing it a little bit more. So I have to say it wasn't really a difficult transition to do. Where my staff wasn't able to do it, I jump in and I do it, as far as making sure doorknobs and things are sanitized. So we're working as a team and everything is going very well.
Okay. Brian, would you like to weigh in on sanitizing and hygiene?
Absolutely. So I know, and I'll just jump to this question because I've seen it come up in about 4 different forms in the chat, the Lysol question. There are obviously cleaning supplies that have been approved by the Environmental Protection Agency as effective against COVID. The expectation is that those are still going to be used in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions and the safety precautions on the bottle. So we are not at this point saying to disregard any of the safety information that has previously been conveyed, or that you would start recklessly spraying Lysol products
Okay. Obviously we're having some difficulty with the PowerPoint, but we can go directly to the video.
Sorry, Beverly, my internet actually went out, so I will share the PowerPoint right now.
Okay, thank you. So the next topic of discussion is staff. This is a huge one. There's been so many questions because we know that the group size and the age of the children will also dictate how many staff you're going to need. So in the regulation, it speaks to centers shall minimize group sizes and movement between groups. The grouping shall not exceed 10 children. Okay, and I've seen dozens of questions already. The group size is 10 children, and depending on their age, you would need to determine how many adults based on the ratios that licensing provides. The staff assignment, they would like to have staff assigned to one group, and Brian's going to talk a little bit about that later. And staff shall be required to wear cloth masks. And there's been dozens of questions around cloth masks. So we're going to go back to our video now. We're going to show the rest of the video, and then we're going to come back and talk about staff, and then we're also going to talk about social distancing. Oh.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R.
Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. So I showed the rest of the video because throughout that last section, you have staff doing a number of things. You have social distancing being shown. You have infants, you have toddlers, you have preschoolers, and you have school-aged children. And so I want to make sure that we could see all of that at one time so we can have a really good conversation about group sizes, and then of course the work that the staff are doing with their groups. We see them washing toys, we see them assigned to small groups of children, doing some individual work with children. We see them wearing masks. So we're going to start with the staff part first. And I'm going to ask Keisha to tell me Keisha, what are your policies and procedures as it relates to staff? And tell us a little bit about staff acceptance of those policies and procedures, and any challenges you might have had in implementing them.
Okay, and that's implementing the health and safety procedures with staff.
Yes.
Okay, so when this first happened, my staff and I made the decision as a team to stay open to serve the parents of the children of essential parents. And so the buy-in, there was buy-in immediately from my staff as far as what we needed to do to follow the health and safety procedures. So I have to say I haven't had any issues from my staff as far as the increased disinfecting of the toys. We were already washing our hands like crazy, so that wasn't an issue. There was a little bit concern as to how we were going to manage the temperature taking in the morning and still maintain our ratios. So once we ironed out that kink, that's been going well. And everybody is just, they're taking ownership of keeping, first and foremost, themselves healthy and their families. And by doing that, we have to make sure that we keep the building clean and keep the children healthy as much as that's in our control. So I have to say, I haven't had any issues with implementing the increased health and safety standards with my teachers.
Okay. And what about the face masks? Are all teachers wearing those, and the children as well?
Okay, so all teachers are wearing face masks. The challenge is with the children. We have tried with the children. For those parents who have sent them in with face masks, we have constantly encouraged children to keep them on. That is a huge challenge for us, I will say. So we make sure that we keep ourselves protected with our masks. If a child is able to keep their mask on, then we have them do it. But I have to say, we don't have one child who has been able or willing to keep a mask on all day. That has been a definite challenge for us.
Okay.
And we do strongly encourage it, but we're not going to force them to do something that makes them uncomfortable.
Okay, thank you. Nicole?
You're welcome.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in terms of staff and where they are, how they're feeling about the new procedures, about wearing masks, what's happening with your children?
I have an incredible group of staff. We did the same thing. We had a meeting to see how everybody was feeling. We even gave options. A couple of the staff did decide that they did want to stay home, which was fine. We wanted to make sure that all staff that came were comfortable with the decision of being here. Our children, our families, our parents have been amazing through this. We are lucky, as you saw in that video, our school age, they are wearing the mask. I would say they're doing it a good 80% of the day. Obviously, if they're eating, if they're running, those are areas that they do take them off. Preschool, we started it. That's definitely more challenging, and now we're having that whole discussion too. They're touching their faces more so, trying to keep the mask on. So we're encouraging preschool. If any parent had a concern about it, obviously we weren't forcing if there was a medical, but even with some of them that at first gave a little bit, now they're pretty much wearing it all day long. My staff wearing the mask, they're fine. Other than now, it's getting hot. So even the building's warmer, it's a long day. Some of the staff are putting in 9-10-hour days now. That is one thing I could say with grouping. I have to have staff come in first thing in the morning, where you used to be able to stagger staff a little bit. Now it's gotten more complicated. We just made the decision to shut down a little bit earlier. We used to be a center 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. That is very difficult to staff, especially with the group sizes. And we're also trying to tell parents to work with their employers a little bit more as they go back to see if they can shorten their hours a little bit, because we did have some parents that were working between working and commuting that needed us from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's tough to have a child having to wear a mask for that period of time, as well as to have the same staff in that same group. But my staff, amazing, an amazing group of women, and I have some men as well, and would not have been able to do this without them. So, and again, our parents too. We have a great group of parents, very supportive. We keep thanking them, and it's, you know, it has been, I can't say it's not difficult, it is difficult, but if you have a great support with your staff and your local agencies, it is workable. It is. And it's, I think it's going to be the same for quite some time. So, but I agree with the mask, it is more complicated.
Okay. And one of the regulations say that a particular staff member cannot go between groups. And how's that been for you?
That's a challenge. When this first started, we did have very few kids. On the average, we had 15 to 22 kids. Now I'm up to sometimes up to 40, 45. That's why we had to make some changes. And I'm going to be honest, having a very tough time finding staff because of the types of wages that child care centers, you know, pay. It has become a little bit more complicated. But I have, again, very dedicated staff, and they are doing, but I think what's going to happen now, I have a license that is higher. I'm not going to be able to keep going and gaining more children because of that group size. That group size is definitely a challenge. We don't cross over unless, you know, there's obviously an emergency or we need to, or if parents come a little bit earlier than what's expected. And that is as we've been adding more numbers. When this first started, no, the group sizes weren't. And when that video was done, we did have fewer children. So yeah, that and I did, my very first person to call was, you know, our Office of Licensing and just double check, see if they had some suggestions, some recommendations, and they did. You know, she definitely walked us through. And since knowing our center and knowing the staff, you know, definitely helped us make some recommendations. So.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Yes.
So I'm sure you've been looking at all the questions in the chat box.
Yeah, and I've got a lot of great questions, and I think I would like to just say first and foremost, we all know this is hard. This is what you all are being asked to do right now is historically unprecedented. This has never happened before. This is something that we're dealing, all of us, with for the first time, and we don't want to be dismissive and say any of this is easy or that any of this will be simple or has a real obvious solution, because the fact of the matter is that's, as you're all very well aware, simply not true. So I appreciate that there's some difficulties that we're going to need to overcome here, and you know, it is going to take some creativity and some very center-specific solutions in a lot of cases. Regarding masks, because that has been the thing I think we've been asked about more than literally anything else. What the health and safety guidelines say, and this is consistent with what the CDC guidelines were, is that you have to encourage mask usage for kids 2 and older. That doesn't mean you need to require them to use it. Doesn't mean you need to constantly encourage them. It just means you need to encourage them. You need to encourage them, instruct them appropriately on how to wear the mask. I think I've said this on every talk I've given on these guidelines. I've got a 3-year-old, and I've never gotten her to wear a mask. I can't imagine how it could be done for a room full of 3-year-olds. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. What we have found is simpler, and this is something we will be sending out an update on, because I know the health and safety guidelines do refer to cloth masks. We learned subsequent to that, a lot of centers have had a lot more success with the face shields, the plastic. I'm not even sure what they're made of, but they look, I think, I would describe them looking more like a welder's mask than anything else. But this nice, a clear plastic, allows you to see the face back and forth. Those are perfectly acceptable. They're a good alternative, provided they're long enough. And we will be sending out some adjusted language on that to make sure it's clear that those are acceptable. And so a lot of centers have definitely found those are something that kids and staff are more comfortable in. and a little more willing to wear.
I think the other question is the whole idea of what happens if staff are out or someone has to go into another room, that's not their group that they're assigned to, and what would you say about that?
So really what we need to start with is the underlying goal here, and the thing we're all aiming for is to have the fewest people exposed to one another. So we need to really minimize the contact between groups, between children within the center, between those groups. So we're counting on there being groups of 10 or fewer kids in a grouping. That doesn't mean in a classroom, that means in a grouping. So if you have a large room, you can separate them by 10 feet within a room, that's fine. We do have a lot of centers with large gymnasium type spaces where they've got several groups in different corners of the room. But as far as the staffing and moving people back and forth, we want to make sure that the groups are small, consistent, and that they're exposed to as few adults as they have to be. Now, we understand that this is not going to happen in practice as readily as it does on paper. We know people get sick, people go on vacation, people are out for various reasons. I'm seeing a lot of questions about bathroom breaks and lunch breaks, directors floating through. So the one thing that really would not be workable under the health and safety standards is a teacher whose specific purpose is there to be a floater. Because that really, at that point, once you have a teacher or a staff member moving back and forth between every group in the center, you've really eradicated any benefit we've gained from the social distancing that we're enforcing. So you can't have teachers bouncing back and forth. To the greatest extent possible, we would like to keep the same teachers in the classroom, in that side of the classroom, or however you've got it arranged physically, so there's minimal adults interacting with each group. So that should mean that you're not necessarily rotating the kids through stations with different teachers, but that the teachers remain there for the duration of the day if possible. We understand, obviously, that reality is that you don't necessarily have enough staff to cover them lunch breaks and bathroom breaks. To some extent, if the director or another person can observe a classroom from an appropriate distance without actually interacting with the children, that's an acceptable solution. There may be other ways to, depending on the layout of your center, the staffing pattern, and what you have available, there are definitely opportunities to be creative with what needs to be done to cover those situations when a teacher does need to be absent from a room. And I would definitely encourage you to reach out and discuss with your inspectors and see if we can identify solutions if you're having difficulty with that. But we also know that, again, you will have situations where you will have to substitute a different teacher in. We understand that, and we just ask that you make a good faith effort to be as minimal as possible about that.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So we're going to go directly to the PowerPoint again, to the next slide. Okay, physical distancing play in classrooms. And I think Brian mentioned this just a few minutes ago, that there are programs that have large spaces, and as long as they can separate children by 10 feet or separate groups by 10 feet, that is acceptable. And I'll have him restate that when we go back to him. But in this section, we also have sharing supplies and food and toys. In the video, you saw that each child had a tray that belonged to them with their name on it, and some of their, I'm assuming, crayons and other kinds of things. And then, of course, close person-to-person contact, hugging, wrestling, games involving touching are not appropriate. So I want to go back to Keisha at this time to talk about how she is implementing physical distancing or social distancing and how that's working in her program for different ages.
Okay, so for our toddler classroom, what we did was we had to remove a lot of the materials from each individual center just to prevent a lot of cross-contamination. And we are allowing children to still be in centers, but we've reduced the number of children allowed in a center. So we're spreading them out a lot more in the classroom. Pre-K as well, we have a pretty large pre-K classroom. So again, we've had to eliminate a lot of the materials that we normally allow the children to have access to. And we are spreading them out a lot more downstairs, trying to keep the 6 feet apart as much as we possibly can. But with children, they like to play together. They do a lot of parallel play. So it is challenging at times, but we're we constantly go and just try to move them apart as much as possible. I think the key for us has been eliminating the amount of manipulatives and toys that they have access to, because that reduces you know, the likelihood that there will be any cross-contamination with children putting toys in their mouths and then sharing them with another child. And our teachers have been supervising a lot of play with the children to try to encourage that distancing between them.
Mm-hmm.
It is a challenge, though. I do have to say, you know, children like to play together. They like to hug. They like to play together. They like to be in groups. So it is challenging. So that's where that supervision with the teacher playing within the group comes in to just help try to keep some of that distancing going.
Now, do your children have different containers where they have their own personal toys and materials, or how are you doing that?
We do not allow, we never have, we don't allow personal toys from home. So that hasn't been an issue for us. As far as blankets and book bags and coats, they all have their individual cubbies to keep things separate. But we don't allow any personal items from home.
Mm-hmm. But do you have a container for each child with their name on it so that they have their crayons that belongs just to that child while they're in the center, instead of having to disinfect those things?
We do not have separate items, baskets with each child's name on it for crayons. We're not doing that right now.
Okay, okay. Nicole, very briefly, the video that we saw earlier was of your program. And how is social distancing or physical distancing working for you with the young children?
School age, we're doing okay. Preschool, it is a challenge. For example, today I had two children playing in the doll area. So what the staff did, I was pretty impressed. They took some blocks and put the blocks down on the floor and said, okay, one of you need to be on this side of the block and another on that side of the block. So we kind of made that division for them. And that is what I've been encouraging the staff to do, that sometimes when you keep saying the same thing, you need to spread it. They don't want to hear that. They don't understand it. So when you do it that way, it's kind of like, ooh, you know, something different. So we are constantly changing up. It's hard because preschoolers, they like to hug you, even, you know, trying to hug a staff. Toddlers, very, very, very difficult. And again, we pretty much just kind of pick them up sometimes and move them. Like if they're in one area, you got to pick them up and move them. Same thing with our infants. Some of them we are able to spread apart, and we do have, for our babies, they have their own bin of toys. That we started from the very beginning, that if they're not walking or crawling, you know, they have their own bin of stuff. Toddlers, the same. There's a lot more obviously cleaning because they are sharing certain things. But with our preschool and school age, we did separate, so it helps. You know, having their own scissors, having their own glue, having their own, it definitely helped the staff. And I was looking for ways to help the staff where they already have enough cleaning and hand washing constantly, at least. And the kids, it's ownership. They're taking their own ownership with the whole thing. So, but with preschool, that's really the tough one. So you got to think outside the box.
Okay, Brian, can you weigh in on this, please?
Sure. And you know, really the emphasis in the health and safety guidelines is to make sure that we're social distancing between groups. Within groups, we would definitely discourage the use of shared materials. We want to, as much as possible, not have kids sharing the same crayons, scissors, particularly anything that's going to go in and out of their mouths. But we understand that within the groups that they are going to be playing together, they are going to be within close proximity, not 6 or 10 feet apart from one another. And that's a given. Particularly with infants and toddlers, there really is just no way we're going to keep everybody totally separated. So we again, good faith effort to minimize the sharing of materials, the cross-contamination of surfaces that might be contaminated with various virus and bacteria. But really within groups, you know, the best effort you can make, I think, is still going to be futile in a lot of groups, and we appreciate that and wouldn't ask to do that. We do, because we're, I think our health and safety standards are a little cold-hearted. We do, I think, have provisions to say no sharing, no hugging, and no bringing toys from home. So we've really hit all of the things that could possibly devastate a toddler. But we don't prohibit toys coming in from home. We do say that if they do come from home, you need to make sure they're sent home at the end of the day to be washed, that they're kept away from other children, and that they are not being passed around the room, particularly when we're talking about stuffed animals and blankets and things that are really difficult to clean and sanitize.
Mm-hmm. So Brian, what should centers do right now if they're interested in reopening?
Right now, procedurally, or, well, first, I think, we obviously need to get a copy of that attestation form back from everybody, but within 24 hours of your plan to open, or earlier, we will definitely take it earlier. We are going to be scheduling inspections over the course of the next 30 days next 36 days at this point for every center that is open in the next month. So we will be out within the first month of your operating. We will be there. We will be zeroing in on the health and safety standards. It won't be a full inspection, but we will really be looking at your screening processes, your sanitation processes, and other things really related to these particular guidelines. And if you have any questions, I would say definitely reach out to your inspector. Those of you who can contact your inspector. And if you don't know your inspector, we need to remedy that quickly. But you can definitely give a call to the Office of Licensing at 1-877-667-9845. We do have people answering the phone, and they can definitely get you that information if you're not sure who your inspector is or how to get a hold of them.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Nicole, thank you for sharing the video. That was great documentation of what you're doing. Keisha, thank you as well for joining in the call. And I think my message to all the directors that are watching is that you can do this. It sounds difficult. I'm sure it's going to come with some challenges. But if you have the staff that are interested and supportive and ready to care for children, they will certainly make the effort and help make this be as successful as possible. At this time, I want to turn it back over to Seal. We've seen lots of questions in the chat box, and there may be some questions that she would like to ask at this point.